She woke up long before the sun did, long before the sky even hinted that a new day was coming. Her small apartment was quiet, the kind of quiet that only exists in those early hours when the world is still deciding whether it wants to wake up. She moved slowly, not because she had the time, but because she didn't want to disturb her little boy sleeping on the couch. He had insisted on sleeping close to her luggage the night before. Excited for the trip, even though he didn't fully understand the purpose of it, she brushed her hair in the dim bathroom mirror, tying it back as neatly as she could. She checked her bag again: boarding passes, ID card, snacks for her son, a small blanket. His little toy car he refused to travel without. Everything was there. She checked it all one more time anyway. It's a habit of a mother who wanted nothing to go wrong. By the time she gently woke her son and helped him into his jacket, she was already mentally preparing herself for the long day. Airports were always stressful. Flying was stressful. But today was important, and not going wasn't an option. Her sister had called her 2 nights ago, voice shaking, saying their mother had fallen seriously ill. She needed to come. It had been years since she had traveled by plane, and doing it alone with a child only added to the weight, but she didn't hesitate. Family mattered too much. The taxi ride to the airport was quiet. Her son leaned on her arm, half awake, watching the city lights pass by. She felt tired, but she kept a calm expression. Mothers learned to do that, to swallow whatever fear or exhaustion they carried so their children could feel safe. When they arrived, the airport was buzzing with early travelers. People rushing, people dragging suitcases, people talking loudly on phones. She held her son's hand tightly, guiding him through the crowd. It had been a long time since she'd been in a place like this. And even though the noises and bright lights overwhelmed her a little, she kept moving. At the check-in counter, she smiled politely at the staff member, though her voice trembled slightly when she asked for their boarding passes. The man at the counter barely looked up, typing quickly on his computer. She didn't think much of it. Airport workers were always busy. She thanked him anyway when he handed her the passes and walked away with her son trailing behind her, dragging his small backpack. Inside the security line, she did everything carefully. She took off her shoes, helped her son take off his tiny sneakers, placed their belongings in trays, and held her breath while waiting. For a moment, everything went smoothly. The security guard even gave her son a little smile and nodded toward the toy car he tightly gripped in his hand. That little moment of kindness made her shoulders relax, if only for a second. After security, she checked the time. They were early, but she preferred it that way. Rushing made her anxious. They walked toward their gate, stopping only once so her son could stare at a large plane through the glass wall. "Is that our plane?" he asked in a small, curious voice. "No, sweetheart," she said softly, "but ours will look just like it." She watched his eyes widen with excitement. His happiness made her feel stronger, even though she was still nervous inside. When they finally reached the boarding gate, she chose to empty seats nearby and settled down. She helped her son open a pack of crackers, brushed crumbs from his lap, and glanced at the people around them. Most passengers looked tired, focused on their phones or sipping coffee. Others watched the screen above the counter, waiting for their boarding group to be called. She tried to keep her little boy entertained while they waited. He played with his toy car along the edge of the chair, making soft engine sounds. A woman sitting nearby looked over, not with a smile or amusement, but with that long, silent stare adults sometimes give children when they want them to stay perfectly still and quiet. The mother noticed the look, but pretended she didn't. She wasn't in the mood to let small things ruin her focus. When the gate agent announced pre-boarding for families with young children, she stood up with her son and joined the few others in line. Her son held her jacket tightly, looking around at everything with big eyes. As she waited, she felt a tap on her shoulder. She turned to see a man holding a boarding pass. "Excuse me," he said politely. "I think you dropped this." She looked down and realized one of her papers had slipped from her folder. She thanked him with a genuine smile and tucked it back carefully. Moments like that made her feel less alone in this big, chaotic space. They walked onto the plane slowly. Her son's excitement returned as he stepped into the narrow aisle, glancing at the seats and lights above. She helped him find their row and slid into the window seat with him before anyone else could claim the space beside them. She settled him in first, buckling his seatbelt, adjusting the small blanket on his legs. Then she sat back, finally taking a moment to breathe. Her hands were slightly shaky, though she tried not to show it. Flying always made her uneasy, and the added stress of traveling with a child only amplified it. A few minutes later, the other passengers began boarding. A steady stream of people filled the aisle, voices mixing together, overhead bins slamming shut. She kept her son close, reminding him to keep his feet off the seat in front of him. Then, a man stopped beside their row. He was tall, maybe in his early 50s, with calm eyes and a thoughtful expression. He smiled politely. "I think I'm your seatmate," he said gently. She nodded and moved aside, apologizing softly even though she didn't need to. He placed his bag in the overhead bin and took the aisle seat. Settling in with an ease that suggested he had taken countless flights before, "Your little guy looks excited," he said kindly. Glancing at her son, "He is," she replied with a small smile. "It's his first flight." "Well, he's doing great so far. You're handling everything very well." She appreciated his tone. It wasn't condescending or annoyed. It was sincere. It made her shoulders relax a little more. As boarding continued, a couple of passengers glanced at her row. She noticed a few eyes lingering on her son, as if anticipating trouble. She ignored them. Her seatmate seemed to notice too, but didn't comment. He simply sat quietly, allowing the mother to focus on her child without feeling judged. Once everyone settled, flight attendants moved through the cabin, giving instructions. Her son squeezed her hand when the engine started humming, his excitement shifting into nervousness. "Is it supposed to be loud?" he whispered. "Yes," she said softly. "It'll be okay. I'm right here." The man beside her leaned slightly, not intruding, but offering reassurance with his presence. As the plane began to taxi, her thoughts drifted to her mother. She remembered the last phone call, her sister trying to sound strong but breaking down mid-sentence. She remembered the guilt, the helplessness of being so far away, how she wished she had arrived sooner. She hoped this flight would be smooth, that her son wouldn't get too restless, that people wouldn't stare or whisper. She already carried enough weight. The plane lifted into the air, and her son gripped her arm tightly. She whispered soothing words until he relaxed again. She kissed the top of his head gently, wishing she could let her own fears out the way children could, without worry of being judged. For the first few minutes, things were peaceful. The sky outside the window was bright, and the plane steadied into its climb. Her son pointed at the tiny clouds below, amazed by how small everything looked from above. She smiled at his wonder. It was moments like these that made the struggle of motherhood feel worth it. Then she felt a tap on her shoulder from the row behind. A woman's voice spoke softly but sharply. "Can you keep him from leaning back? He keeps touching my seat." The mother blinked, surprised. She turned to look. Her son had barely moved, and his small shoes were nowhere near the seat in front of him. "Oh, I'm sorry," she said quietly. "He's just looking outside. I'll make sure he stays still." The woman nodded without a smile, clearly annoyed. The mother turned back, gently reminding her son to keep his legs still, even though he hadn't done anything wrong. Her son nodded innocently, not fully understanding. Her seatmate glanced their way, his expression calm but observant. He didn't say anything, but she could tell he had noticed that the woman behind them had spoken with. It's unnecessary irritation. The mother tried to shake it off. She breathed deeply, focusing on the soft hum of the engines. She reminded herself that people could be impatient, that not everyone understood what it was like to travel with a child. It didn't mean she was doing anything wrong. A flight attendant walked by, rushing through the aisle. She stopped near their row and leaned toward the mother. "Ma'am, please make sure your child isn't disturbing other passengers," she said in a brisk tone. The mother's heart dropped. She opened her mouth slightly, unsure what to say. She hadn't even noticed anything happening. Her son was sitting quietly, holding his toy car, eyes fixed on the window. "He's not doing anything," she said softly, almost apologetically. "Just make sure he stays seated properly," the attendant replied before walking away. The mother felt her cheeks warm with embarrassment. She lowered her gaze, avoiding eye contact with anyone around. She didn't want to be seen as a problem, didn't want to draw attention. She had tried so hard to keep everything under control. Her seatmate finally spoke, not loudly, not angrily, just gently. "You're doing fine," he said in a calm voice. "He's not bothering anyone." She looked at him, surprised by the sincerity in his tone. "Thank you," she whispered. "I'm trying." "I can see that," he replied. "Don't let anyone make you feel otherwise." His words were simple, but they settled warmly in her chest. In a world that often judged mothers harshly, kindness felt rare. She turned back toward her son, smoothing his hair with her hand. She forced a small smile so he wouldn't sense her discomfort. The plane continued forward. Peaceful again for a while, but she couldn't shake the feeling that the atmosphere around her had shifted. It was subtle, but she sensed the eyes on her, the unspoken expectations, the silent scrutiny. She wondered if every move she made would be watched. She wondered if this flight would become another story of a mother being judged simply for existing with her child. But she also felt the quiet strength coming from the man beside her. She didn't know who he was or what he did. Something about him made her feel less alone. She had no idea that his presence would matter even more later. For now, she simply took comfort in it, unaware that at 30,000 feet, someone had quietly chosen to stand by her even before he ever said a word. The plane had been in the air for a little more than 20 minutes when the mother finally let herself breathe fully. Her son had calmed down, leaning comfortably against her side while holding his toy car. He wasn't restless, wasn't loud, wasn't causing any trouble. He was simply being a child, curious, innocent, and easily overwhelmed by the unfamiliar world around him. She knew how much people expected children to act like adults in public spaces, especially in places like airplanes, where everyone was crammed together with no room to escape or breathe. She wished people remembered that children were just children. They didn't cause chaos out of intention. They weren't trying to inconvenience anyone. Most of the time, they were just trying to understand the world around them. Her son ran his fingers slowly along the window, tracing the outline of the clouds outside. She smiled softly at the sight, relieved that at least for now, he seemed occupied and calm. "Do airplanes always go this high?" he asked, not taking his eyes away from the sky. "Yes," she whispered. "This is how they fly. We're just above the clouds right now." "That's cool," he said, more to himself than to her. She brushed a bit of lint from his jacket. Grateful for this moment of peace, her seatmate, the quiet man to her left, opened a small book he had brought with him. He wasn't reading loudly or shifting constantly like some passengers tended to. He simply sat still, giving off a calmness that felt contagious. Every so often, he'd glance at the little boy with a faint smile, not in a forced way, but in a gentle, understanding one. She appreciated that more than she could say. For a few minutes, the only sounds were the soft hum of the engines, the faint chatter of passengers further down the aisle, and the rustling of pages as the man turned them slowly. It was peaceful until the turbulence began. It was mild at first, just a few bumps here and there. The plane shifted slightly, enough to make a few passengers stiffen in their seats. Her son paused his quiet play, looking up at his mother with worry in his eyes. "It's okay," she said in a soft, comforting tone. "It's just the air moving. The plane is safe." He nodded but scooted even closer to her, clutching her arm tightly. His toy car slipped from his other hand and landed near the man's shoe. "Oh, sorry," her son said quickly, reaching forward to pick it up. "It's all right," the man replied with a small smile, handing the car back to him before he could even reach it. But the turbulence didn't stop. It grew a little stronger, causing a few bags in the overhead compartments to shift and rattle. The seatbelt sign dinged overhead, and a few people gasped softly. Her son's breathing grew fast and uneven. "It's okay, sweetheart," she repeated, placing her hand gently on his chest. "Just breathe. I'm right here." But no matter how many times she reassured him, he still looked terrified. Flying for the first time was hard enough for a child. Turbulence made it worse. She wrapped her arm around him, letting him hide his face in her side. She rubbed small circles on his back, hoping he could feel her calmness through her touch. Even if she wasn't completely calm herself, the turbulence continued for a solid minute, long enough for passengers to start muttering, for the flight attendants to hurry to their jump seats, and for everyone to realize the next few moments wouldn't be comfortable. Her son whimpered softly, his little body trembling. "It's all right," she whispered again, brushing her hand through his hair. "You're safe. Just keep holding me." A few passengers nearby glanced over with tight expressions. One woman across the aisle sighed loudly, as if the child's fear was personally ruining her day. The mother kept her eyes forward, pretending she didn't notice. The man beside her noticed, though. His face stayed calm, but there was a stiffness in his posture, a quiet disapproval of the way people were reacting. After a few more bumps, the turbulence eased, and the plane steadied again. The seatbelt sign remained on, but the danger had passed. People relaxed back into their seats. Her son peeked up, his eyes watery. "Is it over?" he asked in a trembling voice. "Yes," she whispered, kissing the top of his head. "You did great. Everything is okay now?" But the peace didn't last long. The woman behind them leaned forward again, this time tapping the mother's shoulder sharply. "Can you keep him from moving so much?" she said in an irritated voice. "He keeps shaking the seat." The mother blinked, confused. "I'm sorry," she said quietly. There was turbulence. He got scared. "Well, he's still moving," the woman insisted. "Some of us are trying to rest." The mother swallowed, her heart sinking into her stomach. "I'll do my best," she said softly. Though she knew her son hadn't done anything wrong, her seatmate's book closed softly in his hand. He didn't speak yet. He didn't hide the fact that he had heard everything. The mother turned back toward her son, trying to keep her expression calm, for his sake. She didn't want him to feel like he had caused trouble. He hadn't. He was just scared. "It's okay," she whispered to him. "Just sit close to me. We're doing fine." He nodded quietly, curling into her side again. A flight attendant passed by a moment later, her expression brisk and rushed. She stopped near their row. "Ma'am," she said in a tone that sounded like a warning instead of assistance, "I need your child to remain still. Other passengers have complained." The mother's breath caught in her throat. Complained? About what? Her son hadn't screamed, hadn't kicked, hadn't caused any kind of scene. He had simply been afraid during turbulence. "I'm sorry," she said softly. "He was just scared. He's calm now." "Well, make sure he stays that way," the attendant replied before walking off quickly. The mother's cheeks burned. Her hands trembled slightly, and she pressed them against her lap to hide it. She stared down at her son's small head resting against her shoulder, feeling the familiar weight of judgment settle over her. It was a feeling she knew too well. She wasn't a loud person. She wasn't demanding. She didn't raise her voice or ask for special treatment. She simply tried to get through life quietly, doing her best. But somehow, she still found herself in situations where she felt the need to apologize for simply existing. She sighed softly, trying to shake off the heaviness. But it lingered. Her son looked up at her, sensing her discomfort in the way children somehow always could. "Did I do something bad?" he asked in a tiny voice. "Oh no, sweetheart," she whispered quickly, cupping his cheek gently. "You didn't do anything wrong at all. You were scared, and that's normal. Are people mad at me?" "No," she said softly, though she wasn't sure that was entirely true. "You're okay. I promise." He nodded slowly, trusting her fully. His trust broke her heart a little in that moment. The man beside her finally spoke, not loudly, not confrontationally, but with a calm firmness that carried weight. "He didn't do anything wrong," he said quietly, his voice low enough for only her and the two passengers nearby to hear. She turned slightly. "Surprised you're both handling everything just fine," he added. "Don't let anyone make you think otherwise." She swallowed hard, trying to keep her emotions steady. Kindness had a strange way of hitting harder when someone was already feeling vulnerable. "Thank you," she whispered. He nodded once, then opened his book again, but she knew he wasn't really reading anymore. He was paying attention. A few minutes passed in silence. Her son leaned against her again, calmer now, tracing invisible shapes on her sleeve with his finger. She let him, even though the woman behind them occasionally sighed dramatically, as if that tiny movement was a personal attack. The mother stared out the window, trying to focus on the calm clouds instead of the tension around her. She wished she could disappear into the sky, away from the whispers and glares and unfair assumptions. She thought about her mother, again, how strong she had always been, how she had carried the weight of life without letting it break her. She wondered what her mother would say now. Probably something simple but wise, like she always did. Something like, keep your heart steady and don't let the world turn it cold. She missed her. More than she wanted to admit, a soft ding broke the silence, the sign for hot beverages being served. Flight attendants began moving down the aisles with carts, asking passengers if they wanted tea, coffee, or something else. When the cart reached their row, the attendant barely looked at the mother. "Anything to drink?" she asked, her tone noticeably warmer with other passengers, but suddenly cool when facing her. "Just water, please," the mother said, forcing a polite smile. The attendant poured the water, but didn't hand it to her. She placed it on the tray table with a careless movement, some of it splashing slightly over the rim. "Oh," the mother murmured softly, wiping the drops carefully so they wouldn't wet her son's blanket. The man beside her watched with a quiet but unmistakable disapproval in his eyes. He didn't say anything yet, but she sensed it. He wasn't overlooking how she was being treated. Her son looked up at the attendant. "Can I have juice?" he asked gently. The attendant hesitated, then exhaled in a way that made her annoyance obvious. "We're doing beverages later for children," she said sharply. "Please wait." The boy's small shoulders slumped. He wasn't used to being spoken to like that. The mother bit her lip, something in her chest tightening painfully. "I can ask later," she whispered to him. "It's all right," he nodded again, but his smile had faded. The man beside them closed his book again. The sound soft but intentional. "You know," he said quietly, directing his words toward the mother, "it's okay to expect courtesy. You're not asking for anything unreasonable." She didn't know how to respond. She was so used to shrinking herself, to keeping silent, that the idea of expecting fairness felt foreign, but his words lingered, settling into the small cracks where her confidence was struggling to grow. The rest of the passengers slowly returned to their routines, watching movies, reading, dozing off. The cabin lights dimmed slightly, giving the illusion of peace. Though the tension in her row remained, below them, the earth stretched quietly. Above them, the sky was calm and endless. Inside, however, she felt the beginnings of something shifting, a slow build of pressure that she couldn't yet name. She didn't know that this flight, this stranger beside her, this chain of small unfair moments, would lead to something she'd never expected. She only knew that she wasn't alone, not completely. And sometimes, one calm presence is enough to keep a heart steady at. 30,000 feet. The plane felt strangely quiet when the drink service ended, almost as if the earlier turbulence had shaken the energy out of everyone. The lights were dimmed halfway, giving the cabin a soft glow. People settled into their seats, some with blankets, some with headphones, and others already drifting to sleep, but the mother couldn't relax. Even though her son was calm again, leaning comfortably against her with his toy car resting on his lap, she still felt the weight of the whispered comments, the sharp sighs, the impatient looks. It sat on her shoulders like something she couldn't shake off. She tried to focus on her breathing, slow and steady, but her mind kept replaying every interaction. The woman behind them complaining, the flight attendant's cold tone, the way people turned their heads even when her son moved a little. She wasn't angry. She wasn't someone who reacted that way. But she was tired of always being the one who had to apologize. She was tired of people assuming the worst, tired of feeling like she didn't belong. She glanced at her son. His small face was peaceful now, his breathing steady and soft. He had gone through so much already in the past hour, but he still had the innocence to fall asleep anywhere, anytime. As long as he felt safe with her. She brushed a strand of hair from his forehead, her fingers gentle and slow. Beside her, the man who had quietly taken in everything sat with the same calm posture as before. He wasn't reading anymore. Instead, he was simply watching the aisle, as if waiting for something. She didn't know why. But he seemed like someone who paid attention to details most people overlooked. For a long moment, they sat in silence. She kept adjusting her son's blanket, making sure he stayed comfortable. The man occasionally glanced her way, but never in a prying or judgmental manner. It's more like a silent reassurance that she wasn't as alone as she felt. She eventually closed her eyes, letting the steady hum of the engines wash over her. For the first time since boarding, she felt the pull of exhaustion tugging gently at her, just as she began to drift into a light sleep. She felt another tap sharp and impatient her shoulder. Her eyes opened immediately. She turned, heart pounding slightly. The woman behind them leaned forward again. Her expression was tight, lips pressed into a thin line. "Your child is leaning on the seat," the woman said, pointing to the top of the mother's seat. "He keeps shifting and touching it." The mother blinked, confused. Her son was asleep, completely still, his head resting against her shoulder, not touching anything behind him. "I'm sorry, but he's not moving," she said softly. "Well?" "He was," the woman insisted, crossing her arms. "I felt it." The mother swallowed, glancing at her son again just to be sure. She knew he hadn't touched anything. He had been asleep for nearly 10 minutes. "I'll make sure he stays still," she said quietly. Even though the request didn't make any sense, the woman settled back with a loud sigh, as if she had personally endured a great hardship. The mother stared down at her hands. Feeling that familiar sting behind her eyes, the one she fought so often, not from anger, from frustration, from being misunderstood even when she was doing everything right. But before she could gather her thoughts, a voice spoke beside her, the calm, steady voice she had already learned to trust. "He's asleep," the man said, looking directly at the woman behind them. "There's no movement from him." The woman blinked, startled that someone had responded. "Well, I felt something," she repeated, though her tone wasn't as sharp now. "It wasn't from this seat," he said firmly, but respectfully. "He's been completely still." The woman opened her mouth to argue, but before she could, the man's steady gaze met hers again. Something about his quiet certainty made her shrink back slightly. She muttered something under her breath and looked away. The mother felt warmth rise in her chest, again not embarrassment this time, but gratitude. She turned slightly toward the man. "Thank you," she whispered. He gave a small nod as if it was nothing. But to her, it was something. It was more than something. It was kindness when she needed it most. The cabin grew quiet again. Even the murmuring passengers seemed to settle into their own worlds. Her son stirred slightly in his sleep, leaning even more heavily into her. She adjusted the blanket again, smoothing it gently over his legs. "He's exhausted," the man said quietly, his voice softer now. She nodded. "It's been a long few days." He didn't ask why. He didn't pry. He simply nodded in understanding. The mother let out a slow breath, relieved that she didn't have to explain everything. She wasn't ready to talk about her mother's health, or the late-night phone calls, or the fear that had settled into her chest ever since she heard the word hospital. She wasn't ready to unpack all of that. Not yet. Maybe not at all during this flight. But somehow, the man's quiet presence beside her made her feel like she could breathe a little easier. A few minutes passed when one of the flight attendants returned, rolling a small cart with snacks. The mother wasn't expecting much, but she hoped that maybe this time the interaction would be smoother. When the attendant reached their row, she offered snacks to the passengers across the aisle with a bright smile. Then she turned toward the mother and the smile disappeared as quickly as it came. "Do you want something from the cart?" the attendant asked, her tone clipped. The mother hesitated. A small snack might help her son when he woke up, she thought. Something simple like crackers or a small biscuit. "Could I have some crackers, please?" she asked quietly. The attendant handed her a small packet, then moved the cart forward. The man beside her spoke politely. "Could I have one as well?" The attendant's tone shifted instantly bright. Polished, respectful. "Of course," she said, handing him the same snack. "Would you like anything else, sir?" "No, thank you," he replied. The mother noticed the difference. It wasn't subtle. It wasn't imagined. It was clear as day. The man beside her noticed it too. His jaw tightened slightly, though he kept his expression composed. The attendant moved on, and the mother stared at the small packet of crackers in her hand, unsure whether to feel grateful or unsettled. She didn't want special treatment. She never asked for it. All she wanted was basic kindness, basic fairness. But it was becoming clearer with every passing minute that she wasn't getting that today. Her son eventually stirred again, blinking slowly as the sleepiness wore off. "Are we still in the sky?" he asked, rubbing his eyes with his small fists. "Yes," she whispered, brushing his hair gently. "Did you sleep well?" He nodded, yawning. His little voice broke her heart all over again. He was trying so hard to be good, to do everything right. He didn't deserve the tension aimed at him. She opened the packet of crackers, handing him one. "Here, you can have these." He smiled sleepily. "Thank you, Mom." For a moment, everything felt calm again. The child's soft chewing, the quiet engine hum. The dim lights had all created a gentle rhythm. But the peace didn't last. The turbulence returned this time suddenly. Without warning, the plane jumped slightly, then dipped. A few passengers gasped. The lights flickered for a second. Her son froze, then grabbed her arm tightly again. "It's okay," she whispered quickly. "Just hold on. It will pass." A loud clatter sounded behind them as someone's water cup tipped over. A few people muttered nervously. The turbulence grew stronger, shaking the seats. Her son buried his face in her shoulder again, scared all over. The mother tightened her arms around him, whispering soothing words. "You're safe. You're safe. I'm right here." The woman behind them spoke again, her voice irritated instead of frightened. "Can you please control him?" she snapped. The mother closed her eyes for a second, just long enough to steady herself. "He's scared," she said softly without turning. "Please give him a moment." "Well, he's shaking the seat," the woman insisted. This time, before the mother could respond. The man beside her leaned forward slightly, not enough to invade space, but enough to make his presence firmly known. "Ma'am," he said in a calm but unmistakably authoritative tone, "we're experiencing turbulence. Everyone's seat is moving." The woman opened her mouth, closed it, then pressed her lips together. She said nothing more. The turbulence lasted another minute before easing slowly. The cabin grew quiet again, except for the soft murmurs of passengers calming themselves down. Her son looked up at her through watery eyes. "Is it over now?" he asked. "Yes," she whispered again, kissing his forehead. "You're doing so well." He held onto her shirt for a few more moments before relaxing again. The mother exhaled slowly, feeling drained from having to comfort both her child and herself. Her hands trembled slightly, not from fear, but from the weight of everything happening at once. "You don't deserve any of this," the man beside her said softly. She turned her head slightly. Surprised by how gently he said it. "You're doing everything right," he said, "and you're being treated unfairly." She stared at him, unsure how to respond. She felt the truth in his words. She also felt the relief of someone acknowledging it. "Thank you," she whispered, blinking back the heaviness behind her eyes. I don't want any problems. I'm trying to keep him calm, that's all." "You are," he said firmly. "You're doing more than most people ever would." She looked down at her son, who was now focused on his crackers again, calmer, unaware of the tension around him. The plane flew steady for a long moment. It should have felt peaceful. The mother still sensed something brewing, a quiet tension that hadn't fully settled. She didn't know what the next part of the flight would bring, but something told her things were far from over. She also didn't know that the man beside her wasn't just any passenger. He would soon speak up in a way that would change everything, but for now, all she felt was a mix of exhaustion, gratitude, and an uneasy anticipation, like the calm before another storm. The mother didn't expect the moment to unfold the way it did. She had spent most of the flight trying to keep her son calm, trying to stop herself from breaking down, and trying to ignore the eyes around her eyes filled with judgment, impatience, or quiet disapproval. She never wanted to stand out. She never wanted attention. She only wanted to make it through the flight without her son feeling embarrassed or frightened. But sometimes life doesn't follow the plan you rehearse in your mind. It started almost an hour into the flight. When the cabin was quiet except for the soft hum of the engines, her son had finally fallen asleep with his head against her shoulder. The mother used the moment to breathe. Really breathe. It was the first time since boarding that she felt her chest loosen. She brushed a hand gently across her son's forehead, feeling the warmth of his skin. Every small rise and fall of his breathing reminded her why she always held herself together. Even when the world seemed determined to shake her, the man sitting beside her remained silent, respectful of her space. She still didn't know much about him. Only that he carried himself with calmness. Only that he had been kind in a quiet, steady way. And only that he had stepped in earlier when things were getting tense. Even though he didn't have to, most people pretended not to see. He didn't. The mother glanced at him now. He was reading something on a small tablet, his expression focused but relaxed. He didn't look like someone trying to impress anyone. He didn't look like someone who needed recognition. He just seemed like a man who understood that kindness doesn't need an audience. She didn't want to disturb him. So she looked back out the window. The sky outside was bright and wide, the clouds below layered like soft hills. She felt a strange mixture of peace and heaviness. Peace because her son was finally calm. Heaviness because she knew the moment wouldn't last. Life rarely allowed her long stretches of stillness. A few minutes later, her son shifted in his sleep, muttering something softly. The mother soothed him with gentle circles on his back. But before she could fully settle him, the plane hit a patch of light turbulence. Not rough enough to scare anyone, but enough to wake him. He sat up quickly, his eyes wide and confused. "Mom, what was that?" "Just a bump in the sky," she whispered, keeping her voice light. "It's okay." He didn't cry, but he clung to her arm with both hands. His breathing turned shallow again, the earlier fear creeping back. The mother kissed the top of his head softly, hoping it would help. The man beside them looked over gently. "Turbulence is normal," he told the boy in a warm, reassuring voice. "Happens on every flight. Think of it like the road. Sometimes the car rolls over bumps. This is the same." The boy stared at him for a moment, then nodded slowly, his grip loosening just a little. The mother felt a wave of gratitude wash over her. It was such a simple explanation, but coming from someone with a calm, steady voice, it made a difference. She whispered, "Thank you." He gave a small nod. "Anytime." The calm didn't last long. Minutes later, her son started shifting again. This time not from fear, but from restlessness. A kind of tiredness mixed with discomfort that children feel when they've been sitting too long. He tried to sit still, but he couldn't. He moved his legs, then his arms. Then he leaned against her, then away. Back and forth, trying to find a comfortable spot, she tried to help him settle. But the cramped seat made it difficult. Just as she whispered, "Sweetheart, try to relax," a voice from the row ahead spoke sharply. "Can you control your kid?" The words weren't loud. They were sharp enough to cut right into her chest. She froze. Her son heard the tone. Even if he didn't understand the words, his face fell. He looked up at her, confused and worried, sensing the shift in the air. The mother felt heat rush to her cheeks. She opened her mouth to respond. She wanted to apologize, to explain, to say anything that would make the tension disappear. But before she could, the man beside her leaned forward slightly. His voice was calm but firm. "He's not bothering anyone," he said. "He's just a child." The person in the row ahead huffed quietly, muttering something under their breath, but they stopped complaining. The mother stared at the man beside her, surprised again by his willingness to speak up. She didn't expect anyone to defend her. She was used to handling everything alone. She was used to apologizing for things that weren't even her fault. The man leaned back and returned to his tablet, not making a big deal out of what he did. Not expecting anything in return, the mother felt something tight in her chest. Loosened slightly. Her son leaned against her again, more relaxed now. Maybe because the voices around him had softened. Or maybe because he sensed that the man beside them wasn't angry with him. The flight went on, the quiet hum returning. For a while, everything felt almost normal. But then the boy whispered, "Mom, I feel funny." She turned quickly. "What do you mean?" "My stomach." It hurts. Those words always created a moment of panic in any parent's mind. She straightened immediately, rubbing his back gently. "You feel sick?" she asked softly. He nodded. She reached for the small paper bag tucked in the seat pocket, just in case. She whispered comforting words, rubbing his back, trying to help him breathe slowly. The man beside them noticed the shift and closed his tablet. "Is he okay?" he asked gently. "I think he's just tired," she whispered. "Maybe a bit airsick." The boy shifted again, trying to hold still. He took slow breaths like his mother told him. After a minute or two, the discomfort seemed to pass a bit. Not fully, but enough for him to relax his shoulders. The mother exhaled deeply. The moment scared her more than she wanted to admit, but she held herself steady for her son's sake. Just then, a flight attendant approached their row. Not the friendliest one. This was the same attendant who had earlier acted irritated. When the boy had asked politely for water, the attendant looked at the mother with a tight expression. "Ma'am, we received a complaint about disturbance in this area. Please keep your child calm." The mother felt her heart drop. Not again. She didn't want trouble. She didn't want attention. She opened her mouth, ready to apologize automatically. But the man beside her spoke again, this time with more firmness. "That complaint is unnecessary," he said evenly. "The child is fine. He's not causing any disturbance." The attendant looked surprised, almost thrown off by his confidence. "Sir, I understand, but no," he said calmly. "You don't. This mother has been incredibly patient. The child isn't loud. He isn't disruptive. He's just tired." The mother felt her eyes sting, but she kept blinking quickly so the tears wouldn't fall. Her son placed his small hand on her arm, sensing her emotions. The attendant looked at the man, then at the mother, her stiffness slowly softening. Finally, she nodded. "All right. Let us know if you need anything." She walked away without further comment. The mother let out a breath she had been holding far too long. Her hands trembled slightly, but she hid them by adjusting her son's blanket. The boy looked up at her with innocent eyes. "Mom, did I do something wrong?" She shook her head quickly, pulling him close. "No, sweetheart. You didn't do anything wrong. You're okay. Everything is okay." He rested his head on her chest, trusting her words even if he didn't understand the whole situation. For a moment, the mother didn't speak. She stared at the seat in front of her, feeling the weight of the past hours, the judgment, the exhaustion, the fear of being a bother. It all pressed heavily on her, but then the man beside her spoke softly, as if sensing her thoughts. "Some people forget what it feels like to be human," he said. "But you didn't do anything wrong. Neither did he." His voice wasn't dramatic. It wasn't loud. It wasn't meant for anyone else to hear. It was simply honest. The mother swallowed hard, her breath trembling slightly. "Thank you," she whispered. "You didn't have to say anything. You don't even know us." "I don't have to know you to see what's right," he said, "or to recognize when someone needs support." The words hit her deeper than she expected. She had gone through most of her life learning not to expect kindness. She had learned to manage everything quietly. She had learned to stay out of the way. She had learned to carry the burden of judgment without letting anyone see how heavy it felt. But this man didn't look away. He didn't stay silent. He didn't assume the worst. He simply treated her like a person deserving of understanding. Her son shifted again, settling comfortably against her. She held him gently, rocking him slightly, her voice soft as she hummed a quiet tune she used to sing when he was a baby. The cabin gradually grew calmer, the earlier tension fading into the background. People were resting, reading, listening to music, or staring out the window. After a while, her son looked up again. "Mom, yes. What if the plane bumps again?" She brushed his hair from his forehead. "If it does, we'll be okay. I'll hold your hand." "And remember what he said?" She nodded toward the man beside them. "It's just bumps like on a road." The boy nodded, processing her words. Then he looked at the man and asked quietly, "You're not scared of bumps?" The man smiled gently. "Not at all. I've been on planes more times than I can count. Bumps are just part of the trip." The boy smiled back, small but genuine. Something about that small exchange warmed the mother's heart. A simple smile. A simple reassurance. But to a child, it was everything. Slowly, the boy drifted back to sleep. This time, his breathing was more relaxed. His small hands no longer clenched her sleeve tightly. The mother watched him for a moment. The rise and fall of his chest steady and calm. The man picked up his tablet again but didn't open it. Instead, he rested it on his lap and looked forward quietly. For a few minutes, neither of them spoke. And then, slowly, gently, the mother whispered, "Thank you." "For being kind, you don't have to thank me," he said softly. "I just did what anyone should do." She shook her head slightly. "No, not everyone would." He looked at her then, not pitying, not judging, just understanding. "Maybe not," he said. "But you deserve respect. You handled everything with grace." She let the words sink in, unsure how to respond. No one had told her that in a very long time, maybe ever. She leaned back in her seat, closing her eyes for a moment. Not to sleep, just to breathe, for the first time since the flight began. She didn't feel like she was fighting alone. The hum of the engines felt softer. The cabin lights glowed warmly. Her son slept peacefully. And beside her sat someone who didn't see her as a problem to be managed or a burden to tolerate. He saw her as a parent doing her best. The mother didn't know what waited for her when the plane landed. She didn't know what kind of news she would receive at the hospital. She didn't know how everything would unfold. But she did know one thing. Sometimes, in the middle of a long, exhausting journey, someone unexpected sits beside you not to fix everything, not to solve all your problems, but simply to remind you that you aren't invisible. You aren't alone. You are still human, even when the world forgets. And that small reminder can carry a person farther than any apology ever could. When the plane finally began its slow descent toward the airport, the mother felt as if she had lived a whole day inside those few hours. Her shoulders were tight from holding her son for so long. Her heart still heavy from everything that had happened. And yet there was one thing that eased it. All the quiet presence of the man beside her. Her son, now calmer and sitting upright, looked out the window with wide eyes, amazed by the tiny buildings below. The fear he had felt earlier seemed to have faded into curiosity. That alone gave her some relief. No matter what had happened during the flight, she was glad he wouldn't leave with only the memory of fear. Outside, the sky had changed from soft blue to a deeper shade, sunlight fading as the plane lowered. The mother watched the clouds drift past slowly, their edges glowing faintly. For a moment, she let the view soothe her. She didn't know why, but she suddenly felt emotional again. Not because of fear this time, but because of everything she had held inside, every apology she had swallowed, every quiet humiliation she had endured, every moment she had wished she could disappear. She blinked slowly, trying to keep herself from tearing up. This wasn't the place for that. Not in a crowded plane. Not when she still had to get off, gather her things, find the shuttle, meet her sister at the terminal, and head straight to the hospital. She had no room to fall apart. Her seatmate noticed her quiet breathing change. Oh, she tried to hide it. "You okay?" he asked softly. She nodded, though her voice barely came out. "Just tired." "Tired is understandable," he said. "But you've handled everything with more strength than you realize." She pressed her lips together gently. She didn't feel strong. She felt worn down. But his words felt warm, like someone placing a gentle hand on her shoulder when she needed it most. The plane dropped a little lower, seatbelt signs still shining above them. People were waking up, stretching slowly, preparing to land. The flight attendants walked through the aisles, checking seatbelts and tray tables, their voices carrying a practiced tone. When one of them reached their row, same attendant who had spoken to her coldly earlier, the mother looked down, hoping to avoid another uncomfortable interaction, but the man beside her sat upright, his posture calm but firm. When the attendant glanced at him, she straightened slightly. "We'll be landing soon," she said politely. He nodded. "Thank you." Something about the way she responded to him made the mother's heart twist again. Why was kindness so easily given to some and withheld from others. A few minutes later, the familiar jolt of landing gear lowering rattled beneath them. Her son clutched her arm tightly again, but not in fear, just surprise. "We're landing?" he asked, trying to peer out the window. "Yes," she whispered, brushing a hand over his hair. "Almost there." The plane lowered slowly, gently, until the wheels touched the runway with a soft thud. Her son gasped and laughed a little, relieved. She smiled too, though hers was heavy with relief rather than excitement. As the plane rolled along the runway, slowing down, she exhaled deeply. She hadn't realized how tightly she'd been holding her breath. "We made it," she whispered to no one in particular. Her seatmate heard it, though. "Yes," he said quietly. "You did." When the plane came to a full stop, people began unbuckling their seatbelts. Some standing before they were supposed to, eager to grab their bags and rush out. The mother stayed seated, letting her son's excitement settle. She didn't want to push or rush him. She helped him unbuckle his seatbelt slowly. Then she reached up to get her bag from the overhead bin butt before she even stood. The man gently touched her arm. "I'll get it," he said. "No." "It's okay," she replied softly. "It's no trouble," he said. Already standing, she watched as he lifted the bag with surprising ease, placing it in front of her seat. He also pulled down his own bag but didn't rush to leave the row. Her son looked up at the man with big, curious eyes. "Thank you," the boy said, his voice shy but sincere. "You're welcome," the man replied with a warm smile. The passengers in front of them began moving out, forming a slow line toward the exit. Overhead lights brightened the cabin, making everyone blink against the sudden brightness. The mother adjusted her son's jacket, making sure he was zipped up. The flight had been long, draining, and heavy, but now more than ever, she wanted to walk off that plane with dignity. She didn't want the frustration or sadness to follow her into the terminal, but as they waited in the aisle, something unexpected happened. The same flight attendant who had been cold to her earlier stepped toward their row. Her expression tight. She didn't speak kindly this time either. "Before you go," the attendant said sharply, looking at the mother, "just a reminder to keep your child controlled during future flights. It's important for everyone's comfort." The mother froze. Her son looked up at her, confused. The people nearby turned their heads. Their expressions mixed, some curious, some judgmental, some indifferent. She felt the heat rise behind her eyes again, the humiliation returning in a rush. But before she could say anything, before she could shrink herself again, before she could apologize for something she didn't do, the man beside her stepped forward. His voice was calm, steady, and firm. But this time, there was no softness in it. There was authority. "That's completely inappropriate," he said, looking the attendant directly in the eye. The attendant blinked, thrown off. "Sir, No," he cut in, still polite, but unshakably firm. This woman did absolutely nothing wrong. Her child behaved better than half the adults on this flight. The mother's breath caught. She hadn't expected him to speak up like that, not now. Not in front of everyone. The attendant flushed, trying to regain her composure. "We received complaints, and none of them were justified," the man said, his voice unwavering. "I watched everything." This mother handled her son with patience and calmness the entire time. She was treated unfairly. Passengers around them fell silent. Even the ones who had been annoyed earlier stayed quiet. The attendant opened her mouth again, but the man reached into his pocket and took out his wallet. The mother wasn't sure what he was doing, maybe showing his ID. But no. What he showed the attendant made her eyes widen instantly. It wasn't a regular ID. It was an Air Force badge, a high-ranking one. The change in the attendant's posture was immediate. Her stiff shoulders dropped. Her face paled slightly. Her eyes flickered between the badge and the man's face. "I didn't realize," she stammered. "That shouldn't matter," he said firmly. "Kindness shouldn't depend on who someone is. She deserved it regardless." The mother stood silently, stunned. She had noticed the man's composure earlier, his calm strength, the way he carried himself with quiet confidence, but she never guessed he held such a position. Now it all made sense. The attendant swallowed hard. "You're right," she said quietly. "My apologies." She turned to the mother, her voice suddenly soft. "Ma'am?" "I'm sorry," the mother nodded, though she was too overwhelmed to speak. Her son looked up at her with concern. "Mom, are you okay?" She forced a small smile. "Yes, sweetheart." The attendant moved away quickly, and the line continued moving. The mother felt her throat tighten, not from sadness this time, but from something else, something warm, protective, and deeply unexpected. When it was their turn to exit, the man stepped aside slightly, letting her and her son walk ahead. But as they reached the door of the plane, he spoke quietly to her. "You didn't deserve any of that," he said. "People made assumptions, and you stood strong through all of it." She swallowed, her voice barely above a whisper. "Thank you for everything." "You don't need to thank me," he said gently. "You were doing your best. That's more than enough." She hesitated for a moment, then asked softly, Do you fly a lot?" He smiled faintly. "More than I'd like. Work takes me everywhere." She nodded, still stunned by his calmness, his presence, and the quiet authority that had shifted the entire atmosphere. They stepped into the terminal walkway, her son holding her hand tightly. Her legs felt shaky, as if the emotional weight had finally caught up to her before they separated.
"I'm the man,"
"Said one more thing. Take care of yourself," he told her. "And your little one. He's lucky to have you." She blinked, tears gathering in her eyes. "Thank you," she whispered again because she didn't know what else to say. Words felt too small for what she felt. He nodded, then walked off toward a different exit, his steps steady. Disappearing into the flow of people, the mother stood still for a moment, watching him go. Then she looked down at her son, who was staring up at her with trust and innocence. "Mom," he said, tugging her hand gently. That man was nice. She smiled softly, brushing a hand over his hair. "Yes," she said. He was. They continued walking, surrounded by travelers rushing in every direction. But for the first time that day, she didn't feel weighed down. She didn't feel invisible. She didn't feel alone. She felt seen, supported, stronger than before, and as she stepped into the bright terminal lights with her son's hand in hers, she realized something quietly powerful. Sometimes a stranger doesn't just sit beside you. Sometimes a stranger stands up for you. Sometimes a stranger reminds you who you are and who you've always been, even when the world tried to make you forget.